Come, I'd like to share a little piece of my secret garden with you. And I didn't choose that expression by accident. No, today I simply feel like telling you about something I discovered not that long ago. Gardening. And when I say I discovered it, the truth is, gardening is probably what made me discover a few things. Because at first I thought I would simply plant 2 or 3 things, water them occasionally, see whether anything grew, and perhaps eventually harvest something that vaguely resembled a tomato, a courgette, or a surviving herb. Basically, I thought I was going to grow vegetables. But what I really grew was a new relationship with time. Gardening became a moment for myself. A moment slightly set apart. A moment when I don't need to perform, don't need to reply to a message, don't need to hurry. You're simply there, with slightly dirty hands, looking at something that doesn't really obey you. And that alone is restful. Because you can help a plant, but you can't persuade it. You can't give it a PowerPoint presentation about its quarterly targets. You can't say, listen, if you could deliver 3 tomatoes by Friday, that would really help me out. The plant doesn't care. It grows if the time is right. It grows if the soil suits it. It grows if the light is good. It grows if it has enough water and not too much. It grows if the season has arrived. And if the season hasn't arrived, it doesn't grow. At first, it's almost insulting. We're used to getting things when we want them. Ordering, receiving, accelerating, optimizing. But a garden reminds you of something very simple. The living world does not operate on demand. It operates according to rhythm. And that honestly amazed me. Really, I was amazed by how much power can be contained in a single seed. A seed is ridiculous when you think about it. It is teeny. It fits between 2 fingers. You could mistake it for a speck of dust. Forget it at the bottom of a packet. We all have lost objects 10 or even 100 times the size of a seed. And yet, inside this almost invisible thing, there is an enormous promise. There is a stem, leaves, flowers or fruits, sometimes dozens of pieces of fruit. And inside that fruit, there are more seeds. It is a kind of very ordinary miracle. And I think that is precisely what moves me. The fact that the miracle is not spectacular. It doesn't make any noise. It doesn't flash. It doesn't ask to be filmed. It simply emerges from the soil quietly. One morning, you see a teeny shoot, and you think, wait, that's it? That's how it starts? Then, a few weeks later, you look at the same spot, and there is an enormous plant, making itself comfortable as thought it had signed the lease. From that point on, I started looking differently at the things we produce. Because when you buy a tomato from a supermarket, you buy a tomato, it is simple, it is clean. It is sitting on a shelf between two other products that are just as simple and just as clean. You put it in a bag, you pay, and you go home. But when you grow a tomato, you don't only harvest a tomato. You harvest weeks of attention. You harvest the mornings when you check the soil, the evenings when you watered it, sometimes very generously, the moments when you wondered whether the leaves were turning a little too yellow, the small doubts and the small joys, the mistakes and the pleasant surprises, the failures too. You harvest everything that happened before the fruit. Inevitably, that tomato doesn't taste the same. Of course, there are chemical, biological, agricultural explanations. A garden tomato can be picked when it is ripe. It doesn't have to survive transport, storage, or calibration. It was not selected merely to be firm, shiny, the correct size, and presentable beneath fluorescent lighting. But beyond that, there is something else. A garden tomato tastes of the attention you gave it. It tastes of the time it was allowed. It tastes of the sunlight it actually received. It tastes of a season rather than a supply chain. It tastes of a repeated gesture. And perhaps just slightly, it tastes of our own pride. Because honestly, when you eat something you grew yourself, you are not entirely objective. You bite into it and a part of you says, I made this. Even though, deep down, that isn't true. You didn't manufacture the tomato. You simply created the conditions that allowed it to appear. And I find that very beautiful, because it is a fairly rare lesson. Sometimes, producing something doesn't mean forcing a result. It simply means preparing the ground, doing your part and accepting that another part is beyond your control. Gardening also gave me a renewed awareness of seasonality. Before, I knew that tomatoes, strawberries, courgettes all had seasons, obviously. I knew it the way we know many things, intellectually, somewhat vaguely, without it really changing anything, without it truly affecting the way I lived. But when you garden, you no longer merely know that seasons exist. You feel them, you live them. You wait for the right time to sow. You keep an eye out for frost. You understand that earlier is not necessarily better, and that later is not disastrous, but it's not the same. Every plant has its own window, its own tempo, its own way of arriving. And in a world where everything appears to be available all the time, it feels good to remember that not everything is supposed to be available all the time. Some things only have values because they are here for a moment. The first strawberry, the final tomato, the herbs you cut just before cooking, or that courgette. you hadn't noticed, which somehow transformed overnight into a medieval weapon. All of this tells us something. Abundance does not necessarily means having access to everything all the time, right now. Perhaps abundance is simply being present at the right moment to receive what has just arrived. And then there is something else that fascinated me. The almost absurd return you get from a seed. You take one seed, just one. It is worth almost nothing, a few cents, perhaps less. You put it in the ground, you water it, you wait, and if everything goes well, it gives you a plant that gives you fruit that gives you even more seeds. It is almost indecent. Like a financial scam, but in a good way. You invest $1 and nature replies, very well. I'll see if I can produce $1,000 worth of tomatoes for you. Of course, in reality, once you include the time, the soil, the water, the tools, the mistakes, the dead plants, and the slugs, yes, the calculation becomes slightly less straightforward. But symbolically, it is dizzying. $1 becomes a harvest. A seed becomes abundance. A teeny thing becomes more than itself. And I think that is where gardening truly touched me. Because it isn't merely a story about vegetables. It is a story about trust. Putting a seed into the soil means trusting something that you cannot see yet. It means accepting that you will not immediately receive proof that it is working. You make one tiny gesture today for something that will not exist until later. And ultimately, we all do that everywhere in our lives. We do it when we learn something new, when we begin a project, when we take care of a relationship, when you write your first sentence, when you return to an activity after years away, when we decide very gradually to change a habit. At the time, it doesn't look like anything. It is a seed. It is small, fragile, sometimes almost ridiculous. But if you return, if you water it, if you give it time, if you accept that there will be seasons, then something begins to grow. Not always what you expected, not always at the speed you wanted, not always in the ideal shape, but something grows. And perhaps in the end, that is the most beautiful fruit of our secret gardens. Not the tomatoes, not the herbs. No. It is this simple, almost childlike idea that the world is still capable of responding to the attention you give it, however small that attention may be, as long as you keep returning to it. That there are still places where a small, repeated gesture can become a harvest. That there are still things that require time, and reward us precisely because we agreed to give them some. So, here I am. I am simply someone who planted a few seeds and, while watching them grow, discovered that he too needed to slow down a little, to respect his own seasons, to produce things more slowly but with more flavor, and to remind himself on certain mornings that a very small thing can contain far more than it appears to. Sometimes all you need to do is place it in the soil and come back the next day.